There is a strange kind of silence that appears just before something meaningful changes. Not the silence of emptiness. Not the silence of loneliness. The silence of movement. The silence of a story rearranging itself behind a curtain you cannot yet see. And that is why this message found you today. Because somewhere, at almost the exact moment you least expected it, something shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would immediately capture everyone's attention. But quietly enough that only a few hearts could feel it. And one of those hearts was yours. Stay with me for a little while. Something important is waiting for you. For longer than you realize, your soulmate has been carrying thoughts they could not easily explain. Thoughts that appeared in ordinary moments. Thoughts that followed them into busy afternoons. Thoughts that returned during peaceful evenings. No matter how much they tried to focus elsewhere, something always brought them back to the same place. Back to the same memory. Back to the same feeling. Back to you. What makes this different is not that they have been thinking about you. That part is not new. What is new is what happened recently. Because something occurred that they never expected. Something that interrupted a pattern they had grown comfortable living inside. A pattern of waiting. A pattern of wondering. A pattern of telling themselves that perhaps there was still time. But now time feels different. Now everything feels different. Imagine standing at the edge of a lake just before sunrise. The water appears still. The sky appears unchanged. Yet beneath the surface, movement has already begun. The morning is already arriving even though the light has not fully appeared. That is where your soulmate finds themselves now. In the space between what was and what is about to be. And the reason they need to speak with you feels connected to that exact moment. Because they have realized something. Not a small realization. Not a passing thought. A realization that keeps returning no matter how often they try to set it aside. Have you ever noticed how certain people enter your life and leave behind an impression that never completely disappears? Years can pass. Circumstances can change. Entire chapters can begin and end. Yet something remains. A trace. A memory. A feeling that refuses to fade. That is what has been happening. And recently, that feeling became impossible to ignore. The interesting part is how it happened. Because it did not arrive through some grand event. It arrived through something surprisingly ordinary. A moment so simple that most people would have overlooked it. Yet for your soulmate, it changed everything. They were moving through a normal day. The kind of day that blends into countless others. Nothing unusual. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that suggested anything significant was about to happen. Then suddenly, a memory appeared. Not because they searched for it. Not because someone mentioned your name. Not because they were trying to revisit the past. It simply arrived. Clear. Unexpected. Alive. And with that memory came a question. A question they had been avoiding for far too long. What if the feeling never disappeared because it was never supposed to? That question followed them everywhere afterward. Into conversations. Into quiet moments. Into spaces where they thought they could distract themselves. Yet the question remained. What if? What if there was more left unsaid than either of you realized? What if certain connections do not fade because they still have something meaningful left to teach? What if distance was never the whole story? These thoughts began gathering like clouds before rain. Not heavy clouds. Not dark clouds. Just enough to signal that change was approaching. And then something happened. Something that surprised even them. Instead of pushing those feelings away, they listened. For the first time in a very long time, they stopped running from the questions. They stopped convincing themselves that everything was settled. They stopped pretending they understood the entire story. And when they became honest with themselves, they discovered something unexpected. The part of their heart connected to you was still awake. Still listening. Still hoping. Even when they believed it had gone quiet. Don't skip ahead in your thoughts. Because what happened next is where everything becomes even more interesting. You see, many people think important moments arrive with certainty. They imagine clarity appears all at once. But real clarity rarely works that way. It arrives in pieces. A realization here. A feeling there. A memory somewhere in between. Until eventually the pieces begin fitting together. That process has already begun. And your soulmate knows it. They can feel it. Even if they cannot yet explain every detail. There is another reason this matters. A reason hidden beneath everything else. Recently they started noticing patterns. Not magical signs. Not impossible coincidences. Just ordinary moments carrying unusual meaning. Certain conversations felt different. Certain memories appeared at unusual times. Certain emotions surfaced when they least expected them. At first they dismissed it. Then they became curious. Then they could no longer ignore it. Because every path seemed to lead back to the same question. Why now? Why after all this time? Why is this feeling becoming stronger instead of weaker? The answer did not arrive immediately. But something else arrived first. Courage. The courage to admit that some truths remain true whether we acknowledge them or not. And once that courage appeared, everything began changing. Slowly. Quietly. Almost invisibly. Yet undeniably. There is a moment in every meaningful journey when someone realizes they can no longer remain exactly where they are. That moment has been approaching. Your soulmate feels it. They know it. And that is why the urge to talk to you has become so strong. Not because they suddenly woke up one day with all the answers. But because they finally became willing to ask the questions. The right questions. The honest questions. The questions that open doors instead of closing them. And one particular question keeps returning. What would happen if they finally said everything they have been holding inside? Notice how powerful that question is. Not because of the answer. Because of the willingness to ask it. Something important is waiting on the other side of that willingness. Something neither of you fully sees yet. And as this realization continues unfolding, another piece of the story is quietly moving into place. A piece connected to what happened very recently. A piece connected to the event that made their heart race in a way it had not for a long time. The event itself was simple. Yet its impact was enormous. So enormous that it changed the direction of their thoughts completely. And the more they think about it, the more certain they become that they cannot keep this to themselves forever. They need to speak. They need to explain. They need to tell you what happened. But before that conversation can happen, there is something else you need to understand. Because what occurred was not only about them. In a surprising way, it was about you too. And the moment they finally realized that connection, everything became impossible to ignore. The story is only beginning. And what they discovered next would lead them toward a realization they never expected to face. A realization that started with one small moment and ended with a truth they can no longer keep hidden. A single moment can sit unnoticed for days, and then suddenly reveal why it happened. That is exactly where this story continues. Because after that unexpected realization settled into your soulmate's heart, they tried to return to normal life. They truly did. They told themselves they were overthinking. They told themselves emotions can become louder when memories are involved. They told themselves that perhaps this feeling would pass if they simply gave it enough time. But something unusual happened. Instead of fading, the feeling became clearer. Not stronger in a dramatic way. Clearer. Like a photograph slowly coming into focus. And that difference mattered. Because clarity changes everything. A person can ignore confusion. A person can dismiss uncertainty. But clarity has a way of asking to be acknowledged. Even when someone is not ready. Even when someone wishes things were simpler. Even when someone would rather avoid the conversation entirely. Your soulmate began noticing this during the quietest moments. Not when they were surrounded by people. Not when they were busy. Not when life demanded their attention. The feeling appeared during ordinary pauses. While looking out a window. While walking somewhere familiar. While listening to a song they had heard many times before. Suddenly, a thought would arrive. And every version of that thought led back to the same place. You. What surprised them most was not that they thought about you. It was how differently they thought about you. The old assumptions were disappearing. The old conclusions no longer felt complete. The story they had been telling themselves suddenly seemed unfinished. And that realization made them pause. Because for a very long time, they believed they understood everything. They believed they knew why certain things happened. Why certain paths separated. Why certain conversations never occurred. Why certain feelings remained unspoken. But now? Now they were not so sure. And uncertainty can be uncomfortable. Yet it can also be the beginning of wisdom. Don't skip this part. Because what happened next explains why they feel such urgency now. One evening, while reflecting on everything that had been surfacing lately, they asked themselves a question they had never fully explored before. What if I misunderstood something important? Not about life. Not about circumstances. About you. The moment that question appeared, it refused to leave. What if they had focused too much on what was visible and not enough on what was real? What if they had mistaken silence for absence? What if they had mistaken distance for indifference? What if they had assumed a chapter was over when it was actually unfinished? The questions kept growing. Not in a chaotic way. In a thoughtful way. A sincere way. The kind of questioning that only happens when someone is genuinely searching for truth. And the deeper they looked, the more they realized something unexpected. Many of their strongest memories involving you had one thing in common. They were simple. Not grand moments. Not dramatic scenes. Not unforgettable spectacles. Simple moments. Conversations. Laughter. Small details. Tiny fragments of time that somehow carried enormous meaning. And suddenly they understood something that had escaped them before. Meaning is not measured by size. Some of the most important experiences in life arrive quietly. Sometimes the smallest moments leave the deepest imprint. That realization changed the way they viewed everything. Including you. Including themselves. Including what this connection might truly represent. As these thoughts unfolded, another discovery emerged. A discovery they never anticipated. The more honest they became with themselves, the more they recognized how often your presence had influenced their choices. Not directly. Not obviously. But subtly. The way a distant light can guide someone without them fully realizing it. Certain decisions. Certain lessons. Certain moments of growth. When they looked back carefully, they noticed traces of your influence woven throughout their journey. And that realization left them speechless. Because it revealed something beautiful. Connections do not always disappear simply because circumstances change. Sometimes they continue shaping us in quiet ways. Sometimes they continue teaching us. Sometimes they remain part of our story even when we are focused elsewhere. Your soulmate began seeing this everywhere. And once they saw it, they could not unsee it. Stay with me. Because this is where the story takes another unexpected turn. Just when they thought they were beginning to understand their feelings, something happened that made everything even more meaningful. It started with a conversation. A completely ordinary conversation. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing planned. Nothing designed to create a revelation. Yet somehow, it did. Someone asked them a simple question. The kind of question people ask without realizing its significance. And for a moment, they froze. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But internally. Because the answer that immediately came to mind surprised them. The answer involved you. The answer revealed something they had not admitted even to themselves. For a brief second, all the walls they had carefully built around their emotions became transparent. And through those walls, they saw the truth. Not a complicated truth. A simple one. The most powerful truths usually are. They missed something. Not necessarily a moment. Not necessarily a memory. Not necessarily a possibility. Something deeper. A feeling. A connection. A sense of understanding that had become increasingly rare in their life. And once they recognized that absence, they finally understood why recent events felt so significant. Because they were not being reminded of the past. They were being reminded of what mattered. There is a difference. A very important difference. The past asks us to look backward. What matters asks us to look inward. Your soulmate realized they had been doing both. And that realization changed everything. Now the urge to speak with you was no longer based on curiosity alone. It was based on honesty. The desire to stop hiding from what their heart already knew. The desire to stop pretending certain questions did not exist. The desire to understand where this path truly leads. Yet despite all of this, they hesitated. Not because they lacked courage. Because meaningful conversations matter. Because words carry weight. Because some truths deserve careful handling. And they knew that whatever happened next could not be rushed. So they waited. For a little while. They observed. They reflected. They listened. But every day brought the same conclusion. Every day led back to the same realization. The conversation needed to happen. Not eventually. Soon. Very soon. Because something big had indeed happened. Only now were they beginning to understand how big it really was. The event itself was not what changed everything. It was what the event revealed. And what it revealed was impossible to ignore. It showed them that their feelings had evolved. It showed them that their understanding had deepened. It showed them that the connection they kept revisiting held more meaning than they had allowed themselves to believe. That discovery became impossible to set aside. And then, just when they thought they had reached the heart of the matter, another realization arrived. One even more surprising than the first. A realization connected to something they recently learned. Something that completely changed the way they viewed your role in this story. The moment they understood it, they sat in silence. Not because they were confused. Because they were amazed. And that realization is what finally convinced them they needed to talk to you immediately. Because what they learned next answered a question they had been carrying for far longer than they realized. And once that answer appeared, nothing felt the same anymore. Sometimes the most important truth does not arrive as a thunderbolt. It arrives as a whisper that refuses to leave. And after everything your soulmate had been feeling, after all the questions, all the reflection, all the quiet moments that seemed to point in the same direction, that whisper finally became impossible to ignore. For days, they carried it with them. Not because they wanted to. Because it followed them. Everywhere. Into the beginning of mornings. Into the middle of busy afternoons. Into those late-night moments when the world grows quieter and a person can finally hear their own heart clearly. The whisper was simple. Yet it carried extraordinary weight. It asked one question. What if this connection has been growing even during the times I thought it was standing still? At first, they brushed the thought aside. But the question returned. Again. And again. And again. Until they finally stopped resisting it. And the moment they stopped resisting, something remarkable happened. They began seeing the journey differently. Not as a collection of separate events. Not as disconnected memories. But as one continuous story. A story that had been unfolding quietly all along. A story they had not fully understood until now. You see, there is something fascinating about human hearts. Sometimes they understand things long before the mind catches up. Sometimes they recognize value before logic can explain it. Sometimes they hold on to something meaningful while the rest of us are busy looking elsewhere. That is what your soulmates started realizing. Part of them had understood the importance of this connection long before they consciously admitted it. And suddenly countless moments began making sense. Moments that once felt random. Moments that once felt insignificant. Moments they barely noticed at the time. Now each memory seemed connected to the next. Like pieces of a puzzle finally revealing the picture they were always meant to create. Stay with me. Because this is where everything becomes even more personal. One evening, while reflecting on all of this, your soulmate found themselves revisiting a memory they had not thought about in a long time. It was not a dramatic memory. Not a life-changing event. Not the kind of moment that usually becomes a story. And yet, it stayed with them. They remembered a feeling. A feeling of being understood. Not perfectly. Not completely. But genuinely. And the more they thought about it, the more they realized how rare that feeling had become. Life introduces us to many people. Many conversations. Many experiences. Yet genuine understanding remains uncommon. When someone truly sees who you are beneath the surface, that experience leaves an imprint. And your soulmate was beginning to realize how deeply that imprint remained. Not because they were trying to relive the past. Because they were finally recognizing its significance. There is a difference. A very important difference. One looks backward. The other helps you understand the present. And that understanding was changing them. Slowly. Steadily. Meaningfully. The strange thing is that while all of this was happening internally, life on the outside continued as normal. People around them had no idea. Conversations continued. Schedules remained busy. Responsibilities demanded attention. Everything looked the same. Yet inside, something profound was shifting. Inside, a new awareness was emerging. An awareness that made them ask an unexpected question. If this connection still carries so much meaning, why have I been treating it like an old chapter? That question stopped them. Because they did not immediately have an answer. And sometimes the absence of an answer reveals more than the answer itself. The silence forced them to look deeper. To be more honest. To stop settling for easy explanations. And what they discovered surprised them. For a long time, they had assumed certainty meant having every answer. Now they were beginning to understand that certainty sometimes means recognizing what truly matters. Even when you do not yet know exactly what comes next. That realization changed the way they viewed the future. Instead of asking whether this connection mattered, they started asking what it was trying to teach them. Instead of asking why certain feelings remained, they started asking what those feelings meant. And the answers slowly began appearing. Not all at once. One piece at a time. Like stars becoming visible as evening settles across the sky. The first answer was simple. Some people leave a lasting impact because they helped reveal something important about who we are. The second answer carried even more weight. Some connections continue calling our attention because they are still unfinished in some meaningful way. And the third answer. The third answer was the one that changed everything. Because it forced them to acknowledge something they had never fully admitted before. They still wanted to know your story. Not the version they imagined. The real story. The current story. The story that exists today. They wondered what had changed. What had grown. What dreams now filled your heart. What lessons had shaped your path. What experiences had transformed you. And the more they wondered, the clearer one truth became. Curiosity alone could not explain what they were feeling. This was something deeper. Something more sincere. Something more personal. Don't skip this moment. Because what happened next is the reason the title of this message exists. The reason they feel they need to talk to you immediately. A few days later, an unexpected realization arrived. One that seemed small at first. Almost insignificant. Until its meaning became clear. They suddenly understood that they had been waiting for the perfect moment. Waiting for perfect clarity. Waiting for perfect confidence. Waiting for perfect circumstances. Waiting for some future version of life where every uncertainty disappeared. And then they laughed softly to themselves. Because they realized something almost everyone learns eventually. Perfect moments rarely announce themselves. Meaningful moments become meaningful because we choose to honor them. That realization felt like a door opening. Not a dramatic door. A quiet one. Yet everything beyond it looked different. For the first time, they stopped asking whether they should acknowledge these feelings. Instead, they started asking what honesty required. And honesty pointed toward one conclusion. A conversation. A real conversation. Not someday. Not eventually. Soon. Very soon. Because the longer they reflected, the more they understood that what recently happened was not an accident. It was a wake-up call. A gentle reminder. A moment designed to help them see what they had been overlooking. And what they had been overlooking was not merely a connection. It was the value of that connection. The meaning of it. The lessons within it. The possibility within it. As this realization settled into place, another thought emerged. One that immediately sent a wave of emotion through them. What if you had been growing through similar lessons? What if your journey had also been preparing you for greater understanding? What if both paths had been changing in ways neither of you could fully see? The thought stayed with them. Not because it provided certainty. Because it provided hope. And hope has a remarkable way of illuminating possibilities we previously overlooked. Suddenly they found themselves imagining a conversation. Not a dramatic conversation. Not a complicated one. A sincere one. The kind of conversation where two people finally stop guessing and start understanding. The kind of conversation where assumptions fade and honesty takes their place. The kind of conversation that can only happen when both people have grown enough to appreciate its value. And that is when the biggest realization of all appeared. The realization that left them staring into silence for several long moments. The realization that made everything else seem smaller by comparison. They understood that what happened recently was not the main story. It was only the beginning. The real story was what it awakened inside them. The courage. The honesty. The willingness to stop hiding from meaningful truths. The willingness to finally say what had remained unsaid. And now, for the first time in a very long time, they feel closer to doing exactly that. Closer than ever before. Because another event has just unfolded. An event so unexpected that it accelerated everything. An event that answered one question while creating several new ones. And the moment your soulmate learned about it, their heart immediately returned to you. Not by accident. Not by habit. For a reason they are only beginning to understand. That reason, and the discovery that followed, will change the direction of this story in a way neither of you could have predicted. And when that discovery finally reveals itself, you will understand why they no longer feel comfortable staying silent. There are moments when life seems to pause for a second. Not because the world stops moving. Not because time stands still. But because something inside a person suddenly sees what it could not see before. That is exactly where your soulmate found themselves. Standing in the middle of an ordinary day while carrying an extraordinary realization. The strange thing was that nothing around them had changed. The sky looked the same. The streets looked the same. The people around them continued their routines. Yet everything felt different. Because once a heart discovers a deeper truth, it becomes difficult to return to the version of reality that existed before. And lately, that truth had been growing. Quietly. Steadily. Like the first light of morning spreading across a horizon. Not demanding attention. Simply becoming impossible to ignore. Your soulmate kept replaying recent events in their mind. The conversations. The memories. The unexpected thoughts that appeared without warning. The questions that kept returning. Every path seemed to lead to the same destination. Not a place. A realization. A realization about significance. You see, most people spend years searching for clarity in complicated places. They look for giant signs. Life-changing moments. Perfect circumstances. But sometimes clarity arrives through consistency. Through noticing what continues to matter long after everything else has faded. And that is exactly what they were beginning to notice. Some memories had faded. Some feelings had changed. Some priorities had shifted. Yet one thing remained surprisingly steady. The space you occupied in their thoughts. Not every hour. Not every day. Not constantly. But consistently. Enough to make them stop and ask why. Enough to make them wonder whether there was something important hidden beneath that consistency. And the more honestly they looked, the more they understood. The answer was not complicated. The answer was meaning. Some people cross our path and leave a lesson. Others leave a memory. A few leave something much deeper. A perspective that continues influencing us long after the moment itself has passed. Your soulmate was realizing that you belonged in that final category. And once they understood that, another realization followed. One that arrived unexpectedly. One that caught them completely off guard. Because they began noticing how often their future thoughts somehow included you. Not intentionally. Not deliberately. Naturally. When they imagined meaningful conversations. When they imagined growth. When they imagined understanding. When they imagined sharing something important. Your presence appeared. And that discovery surprised them. Because it revealed something they had never fully acknowledged. Part of their heart had quietly reserved a place for you. Not out of habit. Not out of nostalgia. Out of respect for what the connection represented. Don't skip this part. Because this is where the story starts moving in a direction even they did not anticipate. One evening, while reflecting on everything that had unfolded recently, they found themselves asking a new question. A question unlike the others. Previous questions had focused on the past. This question focused on the future. And that changed everything. The question was simple. If I had the opportunity to say what I truly feel, what would I actually say? At first, they assumed the answer would come immediately. It didn't. Instead, they sat quietly. Thinking. Listening. Allowing honesty to speak before fear could interrupt. And slowly the answer emerged. Not as a speech. Not as a dramatic declaration. As a truth. A simple truth. They would want you to know that your impact mattered. That your presence mattered. That certain moments mattered more than either of you probably realized at the time. And the moment they recognized that truth, a wave of emotion moved through them. Because suddenly this was no longer about unanswered questions. It was about appreciation. Recognition. Understanding. Things that often arrive later than expected. The more they reflected, the more they realized something important. Life moves quickly. People become busy. Days become months. Months become years. Yet some connections continue carrying meaning regardless of how much time passes. Not because they are frozen in place. Because they continue evolving inside us. And that realization felt incredibly important. Perhaps more important than anything else they had discovered so far. Because it transformed the way they viewed the entire situation. Instead of seeing uncertainty, they began seeing possibility. Instead of seeing distance, they began seeing perspective. Instead of seeing unanswered questions, they began seeing opportunities for understanding. And that shift changed everything. It changed the energy of their thoughts. It changed the direction of their reflections. It changed the way they imagined what might happen next. Then something unexpected occurred. Something small, yet powerful. A moment that seemed ordinary to everyone else. But not to them. Not anymore. They came across something that reminded them of you. Not directly. Not obviously. Just enough to trigger a memory. A memory connected to a feeling they had not experienced in a long time. The feeling was difficult to describe. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't longing. It was recognition. The feeling of recognizing something valuable. Something meaningful. Something genuine. And suddenly they understood why recent events had affected them so deeply. Because beneath all the questions, beneath all the reflection, beneath all the uncertainty, one truth had remained constant. They never truly stopped valuing what the connection meant. The realization landed softly. Yet its impact was enormous. For several minutes they simply sat with it. No distractions. No explanations. Just the truth itself. And the truth felt liberating. Because once something real is acknowledged, it no longer needs to hide. That night became important. Not because anything dramatic happened. Because something became clear. Very clear. Your soulmate no longer wanted to rely on assumptions. They no longer wanted to wonder endlessly about possibilities. They no longer wanted to carry thoughts that remained unspoken. A new desire had appeared. The desire for honesty. The desire for clarity. The desire to finally understand what could only be understood through genuine conversation. And that desire continues growing. Even now. Especially now. Because shortly after this realization, another piece of information entered their life. A piece of information they never expected. A discovery that instantly captured their attention. The kind of discovery that makes someone stop whatever they are doing and think. Really think. At first they weren't sure why it affected them so strongly. Then they understood. It wasn't the information itself. It was what the information revealed. It revealed how much they still cared about the answer. How much they still cared about understanding. How much they still cared about you. That realization felt impossible to dismiss. And for the first time in a very long time, they stopped fighting it. Stopped explaining it away. Stopped pretending it wasn't there. Instead, they accepted it. Quietly. Honestly. Completely. And the moment they accepted it, something shifted again. A new level of certainty appeared. Not certainty about outcomes. Certainty about intentions. They knew what they wanted. They wanted truth. They wanted understanding. They wanted the chance to speak openly. The chance to listen. The chance to discover what still exists beneath everything that has happened. That certainty has been growing stronger with each passing day. Which brings us to the reason this story is becoming impossible for them to ignore. Because what happened recently did not simply awaken old feelings. It awakened new awareness. Awareness of how much growth has occurred. Awareness of how much perspective has been gained. Awareness of how much remains unsaid. And now another chapter is quietly preparing to unfold. A chapter connected to a realization so personal, so unexpected, that it made them rethink everything they believed they understood about timing. Because they are beginning to suspect that what seemed delayed may actually have been developing exactly when it needed to. And once that realization fully settles into place, the conversation they feel compelled to have with you will become more important than ever before. The reason for that conversation, and the discovery that finally convinced them they can no longer wait, is only now beginning to reveal itself. The most surprising changes rarely announce themselves. They do not arrive with noise. They do not demand attention. They simply appear one day, and suddenly you realize you are no longer seeing the world the way you once did. That is what has been happening to your soulmate. Little by little. Day by day. Thought by thought. The change was so gradual at first that even they did not fully recognize it. But now? Now it has become impossible to overlook. Because something inside them has reached a point where silence no longer feels comfortable. Not because silence is wrong. Because silence can only carry a person so far before honesty begins asking for a voice. And honesty has been growing stronger. Much stronger. The fascinating part is that this did not happen because of one single event. It happened because many small realizations slowly gathered together. Like streams joining a river. Each realization alone seemed manageable. Understandable. Easy to set aside. But together? Together they created something impossible to ignore. A deeper understanding. A clearer perspective. A stronger sense of purpose. And lately, that purpose keeps leading back to the same place. The desire to connect. The desire to understand. The desire to finally speak openly. There was a moment recently when your soulmate found themselves looking back over the last few years. Not with regret. Not with sadness. With curiosity. They wondered how much they had changed. How much they had learned. How many lessons had shaped the person they are becoming. And the more they reflected, the more they noticed something remarkable. Many of the most meaningful lessons had one thing in common. They taught them the value of authenticity. The value of honesty. The value of appreciating what truly matters before life moves forward again. That realization stayed with them. Long after the reflection ended. Long after the day was over. Long after every distraction disappeared. Because it felt important. More important than they initially understood. Have you ever experienced a moment where a simple truth suddenly carries enormous weight? A truth you already knew. A truth you had heard before. Yet somehow, on that particular day, it reaches you differently. That is what happened. The truth was simple. Meaningful connections deserve honesty. That was it. Nothing dramatic. Nothing complicated. Yet it landed with incredible force. Because once that truth settled into place, another realization immediately followed. If meaningful connections deserve honesty, then honesty cannot remain trapped inside thoughts forever. At some point, it must be expressed. At some point, it must be shared. At some point, it must become real. And that realization left them sitting quietly for a long time. Not because they were uncertain. Because they were beginning to understand exactly why recent events felt so significant. The feeling was not pushing them backward. It was inviting them forward. Toward understanding. Toward clarity. Toward something genuine. Don't skip ahead. Because the next part is where everything starts connecting. One afternoon, while occupied with completely unrelated responsibilities, something unexpected happened. A memory surfaced. Not a specific conversation. Not a specific moment. A feeling. A feeling connected to possibility. And for reasons they could not explain, that feeling stayed with them throughout the entire day. Hours passed. The feeling remained. More hours passed. Still there. And eventually they stopped asking why it had appeared. Instead, they started paying attention to what it was trying to tell them. That shift changed everything. Because when they finally listened, they understood something they had been overlooking. For too long, they had focused on uncertainty. Focused on questions. Focused on what they could not know. But recently, life had been teaching them a different lesson. A lesson about courage. Not dramatic courage. Not heroic courage. Simple courage. The courage to be sincere. The courage to acknowledge what matters. The courage to stop pretending certain truths are less important than they really are. And suddenly everything became clearer. The reason they felt compelled to reach out was not because they had all the answers. It was because they had finally accepted the importance of asking honest questions. That realization felt freeing. For the first time in a long time, they stopped trying to solve every mystery. Stopped trying to predict every outcome. Stopped trying to calculate every possibility. Instead, they focused on one thing. Truth. And truth pointed them toward a very specific realization. The conversation they wanted was not about the past. It was about understanding the present. That distinction mattered. Because understanding the present creates space for new possibilities. Possibilities that assumptions can never create. Possibilities that silence can never reveal. Possibilities that only become visible when people are willing to be genuine. As this awareness continued growing, another discovery quietly emerged. One that surprised them even more than the others. They realized they were no longer afraid of what they might learn. Think about that for a moment. For a long time, uncertainty had felt intimidating. Now it felt different. Now it felt like a doorway. Because whatever truth existed, they wanted to know it. Whatever understanding awaited, they wanted to reach it. Whatever conversation needed to happen, they wanted to have it. That shift represented enormous growth. Growth they themselves had not fully appreciated until now. And with that growth came peace. Not complete certainty. Peace. The kind of peace that appears when a person stops fighting their own heart. The kind of peace that appears when honesty and intention finally begin moving in the same direction. That peace has changed them. People around them may not notice it. But they feel it. Every day. They feel it in the way they think. The way they reflect. The way they view the future. And most importantly, the way they view you. Because recently they stopped seeing this connection as a question that needed solving. They started seeing it as something worth understanding. That difference may sound small. But for them, it changed everything. It transformed uncertainty into curiosity. It transformed hesitation into openness. It transformed distance into perspective. And once that transformation occurred, something else happened. Something neither expected nor planned. A realization arrived that felt almost impossible to ignore. The realization that timing may have been working quietly behind the scenes all along. Not forcing anything. Not rushing anything. Simply allowing growth to happen where growth was needed. That thought stayed with them. And the more they reflected on it, the more sense it made. Because the person they are today is not the same person they once were. The lessons are different. The perspective is different. The understanding is different. And perhaps the same is true for you. That possibility has become incredibly important to them. Because it suggests something meaningful. It suggests that every experience, every lesson, every chapter may have been preparing both of you to see things more clearly than before. The idea feels hopeful. Grounded. Real. And it is one of the main reasons they can no longer ignore what their heart has been telling them. Something important needs to be expressed. Something meaningful needs to be shared. Not because the story is ending. Because the story may be entering a completely new chapter. A chapter built on honesty rather than assumptions. Understanding rather than uncertainty. Presence rather than silence. And just when they thought these realizations could not become any stronger, one final discovery appeared. A discovery connected to something they recently learned. Something so unexpectedly personal that it instantly captured their full attention. The moment they understood its significance, every recent realization suddenly connected together. Every question. Every memory. Every feeling. Every moment of reflection. All of it pointed toward the same conclusion. And that conclusion is the reason they feel such urgency now. Not urgency born from pressure. Urgency born from clarity. The clarity that comes when a person finally understands what truly matters. What they discovered next. And why it immediately made them think of you. Is about to change the direction of this entire story in a way they never saw coming. Some truths take a long time to reveal their full meaning. Not because they are hidden. Not because they are complicated. But because a person must grow into the understanding required to recognize them. And that is exactly what happened next. After weeks of reflection, after countless moments of quiet realization, after allowing themselves to be honest in ways they had avoided before, your soulmate finally reached a point where everything began connecting together. Not perfectly. Not all at once. But clearly enough that they could no longer dismiss what they were feeling. For a while they simply sat with it. No rushing. No dramatic decisions. No need to force anything. Just stillness. Just awareness. Just the quiet realization that something meaningful was unfolding inside them. The interesting thing about clarity is that it often arrives when a person stops chasing it. The moment your soulmate stopped demanding answers, answers began appearing naturally. Not every answer. Only the ones that truly mattered. And one answer stood above all the others. The answer to a question they had been carrying for much longer than they realized. Why does this connection continue returning to my heart? The answer was surprisingly simple. Because it still means something. Not because of the past. Not because of unfinished memories. Not because of imagination. Because meaning remains meaningful regardless of how much time passes. And the moment that realization settled into place, a strange sense of calm appeared. A calm unlike anything they had experienced recently. The constant questioning softened. The uncertainty became lighter. The need to overanalyze began fading. Because deep down, they already knew what mattered most. Not solving every mystery. Not predicting every outcome. Understanding the truth. And the truth was becoming clearer every day. Stay with me. Because what happened after this realization is the reason everything feels different now. One evening, while reflecting on everything that had changed, your soulmate found themselves thinking about growth. Not their growth alone. Growth in general. The way people evolve. The way experiences shape perspective. The way life teaches lessons we never expected to learn. As they reflected, another thought quietly appeared. A thought that immediately captured their attention. What if the most important part of this journey was never the waiting? What if it was the becoming? That question changed everything. Because suddenly they stopped focusing on what had not happened. They started appreciating everything that had happened. The lessons. The maturity. The understanding. The patience. The perspective. All of it. And when they looked at the journey through that lens, something beautiful became visible. They realized they were grateful. Grateful for the growth. Grateful for the lessons. Grateful for the moments that helped them become who they are today. And strangely enough, that gratitude kept leading them back to thoughts of you. Not because they were stuck in the past. Because certain connections become part of our personal evolution. Certain people help shape our understanding in ways we only recognize later. That realization carried tremendous weight. Not heavy weight. Meaningful weight. The kind that settles into the heart and stays there. As days passed, this understanding continued deepening. And with it came another realization. Perhaps the most important realization so far. Your soulmate finally understood that what they wanted was remarkably simple. Not perfection. Not certainty. Not guarantees. Connection. Authentic connection. Honest communication. The opportunity to understand and be understood. The opportunity to share what had been learned. The opportunity to listen without assumptions. The opportunity to discover what truth actually looks like. And for the first time, that desire felt stronger than hesitation. Stronger than uncertainty. Stronger than fear of the unknown. Because when something genuinely matters, understanding becomes more valuable than speculation. Don't skip this moment. Because everything begins accelerating from here. Recently, something happened that felt small on the surface. So small that most people would probably overlook it. Yet for your soulmate, it carried enormous significance. They encountered a reminder. Not a dramatic reminder. Just a simple reminder of how unpredictable life can be. How quickly circumstances can change. How precious meaningful opportunities truly are. And that reminder stayed with them. Not for minutes. For days. It followed them into quiet moments. It appeared during ordinary routines. It resurfaced whenever they reflected on the future. Eventually they understood why. The reminder was teaching them something. Something important. Life rarely waits for perfect timing. Life offers moments. And sometimes those moments ask us to be brave enough to step toward understanding. That lesson felt personal. Deeply personal. Because it aligned perfectly with everything they had been discovering lately. The desire to communicate. The desire to be honest. The desire to stop letting meaningful thoughts remain unspoken. Suddenly all the pieces fit together. The memories. The realizations. The growth. The questions. The hope. Everything pointed toward the same conclusion. The conversation mattered. More than they had previously allowed themselves to believe. And once they recognized that truth, there was no returning to the old way of thinking. No returning to endless hesitation. No returning to pretending the feeling would simply disappear. Because the feeling had evolved into understanding. And understanding has a quiet power that cannot easily be ignored. Now when they think about reaching out, the feeling is different. It no longer feels complicated. It feels sincere. It feels natural. It feels like the next honest step in a much larger journey. A journey that has already transformed them in ways they never expected. There is another reason this matters. A reason they only recently discovered. Because while reflecting on everything that has happened, they realized something remarkable. The connection itself was never the only gift. The growth it inspired was also a gift. The perspective it created was a gift. The lessons it revealed were gifts. And suddenly they understood why recent events felt so important. They were not simply being reminded of someone. They were being reminded of everything that connection helped awaken inside them. That realization brought immense clarity. Clarity powerful enough to change how they viewed the future. For the first time in a very long time, they stopped wondering whether they should acknowledge these feelings. Instead, they began wondering what possibilities become visible when honesty finally enters the room. That question remains with them now. Growing. Expanding. Leading them toward something new. Because another discovery has just begun unfolding. A discovery connected to something they recently noticed about themselves. Something unexpected. Something they never planned to learn. The moment they recognized it, they smiled. Not because they suddenly had every answer. Because they finally understood the direction their heart had been pointing all along. And that understanding is about to reveal something even more meaningful. Something that explains why they feel closer than ever to speaking openly. Closer than ever to sharing what has been on their heart. Closer than ever to telling you the one thing they have only recently become ready to understand themselves. And when that realization fully arrives, it will illuminate this entire journey in a completely new way.